Okay, so now let's talk about the classification of the covalent bond. Okay, so the classification of covalent bond depends upon the two parameters. Number one is polarization, and number two is number of electron pairs. So today we will be just talking about on polarization. Okay, so polarization means polar. It is derived from the pole, which is having the negative charge or the positive charge. Okay, so polarization on what basis? On the basis of electronegativity. As you guys all know that the covalent bond is always between the non-metals that I told you in yesterday's video. So now let's talk about the polarization. So polarization is having the two type, which is number one is polar covalent bond and non-polar covalent bond. Let's talk about polar covalent bond. So polar covalent bond means having the electronegativity greater than 0.4. You can say the electronegativity difference or electronegativity greater than 0.4. Okay, for example, let's take the example of hydrogen and chlorine. Okay, so hydrogen is having the electronegativity 2.1 and chlorine is having the negativity 3.00. Minus this, the answer will be um, 0.9. So as you guys can see, the polarity of these both is greater than 0.4. So they have high polarity. Okay, so let's take another example, which is hydrogen and bromine. Hydrogen is having the electronegativity 2.1 and bromine is having 2.8. So the electronegativity is of this is 0.7. It is also greater than 0.4. So this is also having the polarity, but according to these both, the polarity is greater of this one, because this is having the greater polarity than this. So this was the polarity. Now polarity, what does polarity means that polar covalent bond means the bond between two non-metals and the electronegativity difference is greater than 0.4 is called polar. Now let's talk about non-polar. First of all, think this is MCQs, which is polar covalent bond will be always heterogeneous. What? Heterogeneous. Heterogeneous means different non-metals. The polar covalent bond will be always between two different non-metals. Will be not the same non-metals like hydrogen cannot be. It can be only getting the polarity on heterogeneous molecule. You can say heterogeneous molecule. Heterogeneous means different molecules. Now let's talk about non-polar. Non-polar is having the electronegativity less than 0.4. Let's take an example: hydrogen and hydrogen. Okay, so hydrogen having the electronegativity 0. Okay, so they are having the less electronegativity than 0.4. So these are non-polar covalent bond. They are having the non-polar covalent bond. Let me give you another example, which is CH4, which is yeah, hydrogen, 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 and hydrogen. So this is having the polarity 2.5 and hydrogen having the electronegativity 2.1. So let's minus this. It is having the electronegativity 0.4. I have find it just the electronegativity between carbon and hydrogen. From this part you can take the electronegativity of this part, the electronegativity will be same. So this is the electronegativity which is not greater than 0.4. It is 0.4. So it is also the non-polar covalent bond. Now let's talk about the partial charges. They will be not having the partial charges, or they will be having the partial charges just like the negligible charges. We will be not counting non-polar charges because their charges are, or you can say partial charges are negligible because they are having the less electronegativity. Let's talk about polar are having the partial charges because they are having the electronegativity greater than 0.4. So talking about the electronegativity, so the chlorine will be having the minus partial charge, and positive partial charge will be on hydrogen, and minus partial charge on bromine, and plus partial charge on hydrogen. Why plus on uh, plus partial charge on hydrogen and not plus charge on chlorine? Because chlorine is having the more electrons and it is having the more electronegativity, so it will slightly like attract the electrons of hydrogen. So that's why to little bit attract more electrons of hydrogen rather than hydrogen, because they are having the high mm, they are having the high electronegativity. So that's why the non-metal which is having the high electronegativity or having the more electrons will be having the minus partial charge, and those which are having the less electrons or having this will be having the chlorine is having the minus partial charge because they are having the electronegativity and electrons greater, and they are having the less. So this was the concept of classification of the covalent bond on the basis of polar and non-polar.